So in the first part of the introduction, I tried to give you a bit of the prehistory of the alphabet. In the second part, I'm simply going to take you through very quickly a first glimpse of what the 12 chapters are about so that you have a sense of orientation. So the first chapter, which again is not the main topic of the book, is really still about this prehistory, mainly dealing with the Russian sources, Slavic sources, I should say, because Russia is a modern word, but it's the Slavic sources, to which I'll return very briefly at the end of the fourth chapter. And I call it mark, signs, and symbols. This is at that early stage when tamgas, symbols, letters are all mixed together. And here, it's the Russians that have done the most interesting work. There's a man called Kosarev who has made a study of primitive signs, and if you look closely, you'll see Indus, China, Luwian, Vinca, which is up in what is today Serbia, and so on. And so he takes a basic symbol and then shows how it goes really all over the world. And I'm not going to analyze every one of these. You notice the swastika here as well. Some of them very elaborate, but the main thing to notice is that you'll see it better on the next page. You have one symbol, which then gets a slight variant. This, of course, is the yen in Japanese, for example. But then that splits again into little bits, so that this becomes the Y, or this symbol, which is two V's intersecting, yes, becomes this one, becomes that, becomes that, becomes that. And this is also the letter A in some alphabets. In other alphabets, it's a different thing. Here you have this little fern-like thing going. In the very earliest ones, that goes in all four directions, and you'll see that it's the god Tengri, as you'll see in chapter 1. But here it's already split like this, but then even that splits into various ones, and then it becomes what you would call a Trishula, but in fact is also the letter sh in Slavic. And so and these are also motions of the body. So you'll see a little girl in that position in one of the later chapters. And here is our Vesica Pisces, the female symbol, yes. And then it comes up in this, and we'll see various versions of that. And here you see the reverse principle happening. So just to show that other people have done a great deal of work on that, in my opening chapter, I'll try to show that there are links with the shamanic tradition, and then show how the symbols that we think of as typically Slavic come out of this, and then we'll end up with the classic Bulgarian and Cyrillic alphabets at the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2, I will turn to the Sanskrit alphabet, and here essentially show you that yes, we have the letters of the alphabet, but the letters of the alphabet become a cosmology. So the first 5 letters, ka, ka, ga, ga, so on, become the 5 elements, or the Mahabhutas, as I think you call them. And then there are, well, it's in the simplified version, you have 25 letters. So really the first 5 Vargas. And those become then 25 tattvas, and when it goes to Egypt, those become the 25 stoicheia, or the 25 elements, and the 25 letters of Old Greek. And then in the advanced versions, you have 35 letters, and you start then with the 5 elements, and then the 5 organs, and the 5 senses, and the 5 objects of sense, and then you end up with the 5 things that make you a human, and then you end up with Shiva and Shakti in the end. And this in Kashmirian Shaivism, or the Shiva religion linked in Kashmir, this becomes then an ascent to God. And so the letters are not just letters, they are actually like a ladder to get back to heaven from where you came. And if you descend, then it's a descent into creation. And they get linked with the various chakras. And those chakras in turn get linked with the Yavarga, so Ya, Yara, Lava, and so on. And you see those there. And then here are the various consonants and vowels linked. When we go to the west, to Christ, this is Mandaic, and instead of 7 chakras, there are 5 chakras. But it's the same basic yogic principle. In Christianity, I was never told that Christ was a yogi, but yogi lessons are still given on Mount Carmel today. So that I will try to explain, well, in how it links with the Kala chakra and so on. But basically, and how then the notion of these chakras spreads to Russia, to the North American Indians, all over the world. The 3rd chapter, as I mentioned right at the beginning, is on breathing and life. And there, basically what we now call we would call it the spine, what you would call the Sushumna, becomes the basis of a central line. But that central line then also becomes a way of drawing funny figures, and that then leads you to initial letters. We just saw that one there. And if you do that in 4 directions, you have the Tengri sign again. So there is this extraordinary way in which the letters get linked with breathing, and then the breathing becomes a way of understanding the whole cosmos. And the simple version is you stand up, and so you have 7 chakras to your waist, and then another 7 below. And the 7 below, this is the Potala, and below is called the Patala. And Vishnu has 14, and those 14 are then also the 14 that leads to the something called the fortnight, but it's the 14 cycle, not only in the 2-week cycle of the moon, but also the 14 phases of the year and the 14 constellations and so on. So what begins as a thing in the body becomes a basis of recreating the universe. Well, another fundamental thing, as I said, there were mudras, mantras, and yantras. Well, this becomes a whole extraordinary science all over the world. So here you have the old Russian alphabet that I showed you right at the very beginning, and you see that the T form is really based on a man, he's doing a yoga pose. And here you see the balance side. This is the god Odin, who is in the Scandinavian story, is like your goddess Vak, or in other versions it's Shiva that is the founder of the alphabet. And here you see what's called runic yoga, because you have 22 positions, and each one of those creates a different letter. What most people don't know is that the Arabic alphabet was based on motions of the body. So the letter A, the letter D, and if I lie down on the floor to do my prayers, that's the letter M. ADM is Adam. And so it's not just, Adam isn't just the first man, it's also the first prayer I do. And in fact, if you're a good Muslim, you have to pray 3 times a day, and you have to do 119 postures, and they figure out how many postures you have to do in the 50 years of your life. So the whole of your life becomes a systematic play with movement and prayer. But that's going beyond what I'm onto now. Those same motions in the Tantuinin become the basics of what the Chinese do in all of their kung fu. Well, there's the warlike kung fu and there's the peaceful kung fu, but all of these motion things that the Chinese do all come via the Middle Asia, and it's all linked. There used to be 28 motions, now there are 18. My next chapter is about heavenly models. So what's fascinating is that all of here is a version amongst the people that do the runes. So each of these funny runes is actually a constellation. And here are a series of constellations that make the basics of the Phoenician alphabet. And amongst the Hebrews, they had what's called the astral origins of the Hebrew alphabet. Each of the Hebrew letters begins as a star. And there are several celestial alphabets, and I'll talk about that. And then the Hebrew Psalm 19 is really a star alphabet. And so there is a whole history of how, well, in your country, in India, this is linked with nakshatras. And of course there is the Milky Way, and the path of the ecliptic crosses the Milky Way twice. And when it crosses it in the time that you think of as Dashain, is when it crosses, there is in the Milky Way an island. And so that is considered the birth of life. And if you look on Earth, all the places of life is where the Hindus created a city wherever there were two rivers coming together, or three rivers coming together, a Triveni, and there was always an island in between. And if you go to all the great cities of the West, Paris has the Ile-de-France, Rome has the Isola Tibertina. Every great city in every great city in Europe and in Asia has an island in the river, and that because that is reflecting the beginning of life in the heavens. But that's what I'll talk about. Then this becomes a structuring process for the earth. And so you take the 24 runes, or sometimes 28 letters, you link them with the 8 seasons of the year, and you link them with the 8 feasts of the year, and so on. And again, this is a mystical version that was developed in the 20th century, and that divides into 3. So you have man, God, and spirit. And again, Kaya Vakchita, man, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost in the heavens, but the world of man, the world in between, and the world of the spirit that links the two. Then I start, all these principles, how do they move? Well, the first story is how they move eastwards. So I told you that in the old Vedic system, we have the 5 Vargas going horizontally. And here you see the mouth pattern. Here, by the time of Panini, so sometime it's thought between the 6th century and the 3rd century BC, he takes that horizontal list and makes them vertical. And so you get the gutturals, the palatals, the cerebrals, and the dentals, and so on. Here's exactly the same mouth, but completely different signs, and this is the Thai alphabet. They didn't just copy roughly, they just took the whole thing, hook, line, and sinker, we would say in Canadian, and copied it. Now, this didn't just happen with Thai, it happened with 40 major alphabets from here to Japan, and even some early versions of Chinese. So this is one chapter of our story. And then, and of course, the Western, as we saw, the Western imperialists, when they saw the connections between Aramaic and some versions of Brahmi and so on, they assumed that Brahmi was an Aramaic copy. Well, it isn't, because Brahmi has 50 letters if you do all the vowels and so on. So it can't come from a 22-letter alphabet. I mean, you have to have great stretchy imagination to make that happen. So then I try to talk about the westward form. And again, here is your basic alphabet. Here is an alphabet called the Piesian alphabet, which is a variant of the Persian alphabet discovered in... Now, you again have the gutturals, the palatals. You skip the cerebrals, but basically you have the ka, tsa, and you have the ya and the sa vargas. This is an Arabic one. It's slightly different, but the basic principles of having, basically your ka varga starts there, and your sa varga and your pa varga is there, right? Well, the Arabic does the same. The deepest things are in the throat, and you move outwards. But we're not going to go into all the details, but just to show there is this basic principle. And you see, this is Indicum, a simplified version of what was happening in India. This is Chaldean. Well, you just look at the signs, they're copied. And here another one, this is Indicum, and this is Ethiopian, G's. They're copied. Except instead of going A, B, C, D, they go H, L, H, M. So the A and the Ha, so in Sanskrit, the first vowel and the last consonant, aha, yes, becomes ha, la. So instead of saying alphabet, A-L, they say ha, la. And then ha, M. So you link 1 and 13, 1 and 12, and then 2 and 13, and so on. And we'll see that there are a series of different ways of combining the letters, and most of the scholars just find one of those and say, oh, that's the way it was, and forget that Arabic can be done in different ways. So here is Indian 1, and this is the alphabet of the Ethiopian alphabet of the Nubians. And you'll see that they just copied each other. And then these have numbers attached. So, and when you rearrange the numbers, then you get another version. That's more details than we want at the moment. So now, the Western alphabets, well, the Arabic has two basic versions, A, Ba, Ta, Tsa, which is their version of the alphabet, and then A, B, J, D, which they call Abajun, Jadun, or it's now called Abjad. And this is the one that's done numerically, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 10, 20, 30, 40, and so on, going to 28, which is 1,000. And this one is by shapes. So you'll notice there are, in the narrow version, I think there are 16 shapes, and then in some versions there are 17 or 18 or 19 shapes, but mainly, okay. And here you see a syllabary, so you're going through all the different vowels in the way that you do with Aryabhata. In the Abyssinian version, there are 33 letters. Then you take those 7, you drop 7, and you have Ethiopian with 26. And then you do a simplified version, and you have the Ethiopian Abjad. So these are 3 versions. Most people look at this one and say, oh, yes, so they were primitive. But they forget that it's a primitive summary of this one. And this one is closer to the Hebrew, and there is one which actually has Hebrew letters connected with it, but that's another story. These vary. So the very early alphabets, I told you that they were mainly signs. So here is a Dacian sun symbols. Now, if you look closely, there are intersecting things that look almost like our symbol of the Vesica Pisces. Here is one of the earliest alphabets called Razens-Molvitsky, and it's based on something called Lebensskog Vira, And this again is a purely geometrical alphabet. The Russians claim that this is the alphabet from which all European alphabets come from. And this starts in Middle Russia, so southeast of Moscow on the Volga, and then goes to the area Lepenskog Vir, which is in Bulgaria, and then goes to Vinca in Serbia, and from there spreads all across. The next chapter links this with shapes and numbers and shows you that you can take those runes that we were showing and link it with an octagonal shape, which is also the tree of the world or the tree of life. And the Hebrews then link this with a cube, and you use the cube to create the space not only of discussion but of the whole of all the sounds. In the final chapter, I try to reflect on what are some of the underlying principles that link all of these things and what makes an alphabet. Well, I've come across 6 things. What do alphabets do? They create identity, so that's the primitive part of like what the Internet of Things is trying to do now, create a brand, so that I can recognize that cow is my cow and so on. To create order, to create belief, to create a creation story, to answer how life comes about, and then to create templates to make it all possible. So the templates, well, one of the things they do is each of the languages has a cursive script as we have today, and when we were growing up, we had to learn how to read, we called it capital letters, but it's really how do you do block letters. And here you see block letters in Fagspa, so a Tibetan alphabet. Here you see it in Mongolian, and here you see square horizontal Armenian. And if you look very closely, you will see here you have the swastika going this way, and there's the swastika going that way. And those are in when we get to the human body applied to the letters, this becomes Ha and Tha. This is the sun, this is the moon. And so here you are at the symbol level, and you will notice that somewhere along there you'll see the Facebook sign. So you take a very simple shape, and you squeeze it in different directions. And here you see the letter A in Sanskrit, and switched, but now in a geometrical form. And here is another one of those, well, there are those two, but here you see them now as a decoration. Remember I told you that there is this way in which, in the beginning, there is an overlap between decoration and letter making. So here it is as a letter. Here it's the letter Ha in Old Arabic, linked with Ugaritic. But you see here, it's linked with the Prophet Muhammad. And here also, here it's Allahu 4 times, but also creating, so here you see that appearing as an alphabet letter. So what happens is, in this early version, here are the modern Arabic letters, here are the another version of the Arabic letters, and here are different symbols. And what basically happens is these 2 rows disappear, and all we have left is the letters. Now, one of the fascinating things is that you have a simple letter Aleph, which has a value of 1, but it can also be 26 or 111, and so on. And so there is a whole lost history of that. Or you have this symbol, which is the god Ra, which is the yin yang, which is linked with Theta in Russian. Here you see the god Agni, but now as a Russian symbol. Here you see the swastika in Christ Church in the aisle of a church in a Christian church in Oxford, and here you see Muhammad. So again, this mixing of all of these things. here you see the idea of templates that I was telling you about applied to Arabic, Thai, and to Japanese. Here you see a curious letter in Hanek coming up in Egypt and then applying to Epsi in Coptic and Japanese. And here, just to end the story, we see old maps of the 18th century. So here is Brahmanicum and here is Malabaricum. Here is one for Africa, and here you see how big Ethiopia was in their map. And here you see different alphabets along the way. Here is their view of Europe with Sclavonica here. Here is their view of North America with Persian. And here is their view of South America with Brahmanicum. So there is an enormous history that we have lost. Well, the big picture is that there are 10 to 15 world language families. There are only 3 important ones: Indo-European, Sino-Tibetan, Afro-Asiatic. Basically, this is the Sanskrit and Latin, this is Chinese, and this is Arabic, to simplify. And as it goes west, the 7 double letters become the 7 candles. The 7 candles become the 7 planets, and then they become the 7 notes, the 7 chakras, the 7 colors, the 7 liberal arts, and the 7 everythings. And it becomes then a framework for the whole of knowledge. And remember, we started with this when we saw the 2 symbols? Well, there it is in Suryani, in that first language. There it is as the symbol of the god, the angel Gabriel. Here it is in Honosithium. Here it is in Hungarian. Here it is in Yenisei. So we're now in Mongolia. Here we are in Turkic runes, and here we are with the snitch symbol in Russian. And that becomes the letter A in various versions. So what we thought of as something very strange in Russian is actually one of the basics of the whole world. And I showed you the spiral. I take the spiral and do it this way. It becomes Zemlya, which is the word for earth. I then decorate it, and it becomes decorative Gothic. I then do it this way, and then that becomes the modern letter. Now, most people that see that don't know the history and don't have any idea of how we got to that funny letter, or the fact that it's this way and then reversed. But this is the dragon in the heaven that becomes the snake in earth in the Chinese zodiac. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is the story I want to tell. It's really the story of how these funny symbols all start by explaining the world and then become the speech that we use in every day. Thank you.